The desert had turned cold that night, the kind of cold that made even coyotes silent. A silver moon floated above the western hills, throwing light on a wide stretch of empty land where a single ranch house stood, strong and alone against the wind. Inside, lanterns glowed through the windows, spilling gold across the dry grass. The man who owned that ranch, everyone around called him the Millionaire Cowboy, sat by the fire, polishing an old revolver that hadn't been fired in years. His name was Cole Mathers, a man who had built an empire of cattle, land, and mines, yet carried a silence that even the wind couldn't break. Outside, the sound of wagon wheels creaked faintly in the distance. It was slow, uneven, like something barely holding together. Cole frowned, setting down his revolver. The sound grew closer. He stood, stepped to the door, and opened it to the chill air. A small, broken-down wagon rolled into view, drawn by a horse so thin its ribs showed. On the seat sat an old couple, wrapped in threadbare blankets. Their faces were pale, weary, travelers worn down by life itself. The old man raised his trembling hand and called out, voice cracked from the cold. "Sir, we can't walk anymore. Can we stay one night?" Cole stood there, his tall figure outlined in the doorway. He didn't answer at first. Strangers rarely came this far into his land. Most folks knew better, rumors said he'd turned bitter after losing everything he once loved. But when his eyes met theirs, the frail woman clutching her husband's arm, shivering, something stirred inside him. He nodded once. "Get down. The barn's warm. You'll stay the night." The old couple exchanged a look of relief so deep it nearly broke his heart. Inside the barn, the cowboy threw hay into a clean corner, spread an old blanket, and lit a lantern. The old woman whispered softly, "Thank you, sir, we won't trouble you long. Just need rest before the morning." Cole said nothing, only nodded. He left them there and returned to his house. But something about their voices stayed with him, maybe the way they said, "we," like it meant the whole world. He poured himself a cup of black coffee and sat back down by the fire. Yet he couldn't shake the sound of that old man's cough echoing through the cold night air. Hours passed. Midnight. The wind howled harder now, and the fire crackled low. Cole finally stood, grabbed his coat, and stepped back outside. Snow had begun to fall, light flakes drifting through the moonlight. He walked to the barn and opened the door quietly. The old couple were huddled together under their blanket, asleep but shivering. Their hands were clasped tight. On the ground beside them, he saw a small, worn Bible, pages torn, spine nearly broken. He stared at it for a long moment. Then, quietly, he laid another thick wool blanket over them, his own from the house. He adjusted the lantern so the light wouldn't burn out. When he turned to leave, he heard the old man whisper in his sleep, "Thank you, son." Cole froze. No one had called him son in 20 years. Back inside the ranch house, Cole stood by the window watching the snow gather on the fence posts. His thoughts went backward, to a time before money, before the land, when he'd been just another poor ranch hand trying to take care of his parents. He remembered his father dying young, and his mother begging the landlord for one more night inside before they were thrown out. That memory burned like a brand. Cole swallowed hard, turned from the window, and went to his desk. He opened the drawer and pulled out a small pouch, gold coins, payment he'd been saving for a new horse. He looked at it for a long second, then nodded to himself. Morning came cold and white. The barn was warm now, thanks to the stove he'd lit before dawn. The old couple awoke slowly, startled to find hot coffee waiting on a wooden tray. Cole stood outside, leaning on the doorway. "Drink up," he said. "You'll need it before the day's done." The old man smiled faintly, his eyes full of tears. "You didn't have to do this, son." Cole replied quietly, "Maybe I did." The woman sipped her coffee with trembling hands. "You're a good man. Not many like you left out here." He didn't answer. He simply helped the old man to his feet, checked their wagon, and replaced one of the broken wheels with a spare from his shed. When the woman saw that, she started crying. "We have nothing to repay you with, sir. We were just hoping someone would let us rest before we moved on." Cole looked at the horizon. "Where were you headed?" "Nowhere," the old man said. "Just away from where we came from." Something about that answer hit him deep. He walked around to the back of the wagon, where their belongings lay, a few clothes, a broken lantern, and a faded photograph of a younger couple standing beside a small house. He turned to them. "That your home?" "It was," the old woman said softly. "Before the bank took it. We lost the land, the animals, everything." Cole's jaw tightened. Banks'll take the soul out of a man quicker than the desert. He went silent for a moment. Then he said, "You two ain't going anywhere." They looked at him, confused. "You're staying here," he said firmly. "This land's big enough for a few good folks. You can take the east cabin, it's been empty since spring. You'll work the garden if you're able. You'll eat at my table." The old man's lips trembled. "We can't accept that, son." "You can," Cole said. "And you will. You've walked far enough." They tried to protest, but he simply walked back to the house, leaving them standing there, overwhelmed, speechless. That night, the east cabin glowed with light for the first time in years. Smoke rose from the chimney, and laughter, faint, but real, carried through the cold air. Cole sat on his porch, coffee in hand, watching that glow. Something inside him felt lighter, warmer. Over the next few weeks, the ranch changed. The old man, whose name was Eli, helped mend fences and feed the horses. His wife, Martha, cooked meals that filled the air with the smell of cornbread and stew. Cole hadn't tasted real home cooking in a decade. Some nights, they'd all sit together by the fire, and Eli would tell stories about the early frontier, how he once rode with a wagon train west, how he'd fallen in love with Martha by a river in Kansas. Cole would listen quietly, his face unreadable. But inside, something long frozen began to thaw. One evening, snow fell again. They all sat around the fire, Martha knitting while Eli tuned an old fiddle. Cole stared into the flames and said softly, "You two remind me of my folks." Martha smiled gently. "Then they must have been good people." "They were," he said. "But poor. When I was 16, I promised I'd build a place no one could ever take away. I did, but I lost the people I built it for." Eli looked at him for a long moment. "Son, the Lord gives us what we need, not always what we want. Maybe you were building this place for us." A silence settled. The fire popped. Cole looked at the two of them, their hands, worn but steady, their faces lined with years, and felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Family. A month later, Cole took a ride into town for supplies. As usual, the townsfolk greeted him with respect, some with fear, others with envy. They knew him as the man who had everything but still lived like a ghost. But when they saw him buying blankets, flour, and medicine for an old couple living out at his ranch, rumors began to spread. Cole Mathers, the millionaire cowboy, taking in strangers? Reckon he's lost his mind or found his heart. Cole didn't care what they said. For the first time in years, their words didn't matter. One evening, weeks later, Eli fell ill. The cold got into his chest and wouldn't let go. Cole rode all night through a snowstorm to fetch the doctor from town. When they returned, Eli was barely breathing. Martha sat by his side, holding his hand, whispering prayers. Cole knelt beside him. "You'll be fine, old man. You still owe me a fence." Eli smiled faintly. "Guess you'll have to build it without me, son." And with that, he closed his eyes for the last time. Martha wept silently, her tears falling onto Eli's still hand. Cole stood there, his heart heavy, his throat burning. He buried Eli at sunrise, near the oak tree by the creek. On the wooden cross, he carved one word, friend. After that, Martha stayed on at the ranch. She cooked, tended the garden, and told stories by the fire. Sometimes she would say, Eli would be happy knowing we found peace here. And Cole would nod, staring at the stars. Years passed. The ranch grew greener. Cole grew older, but softer. Martha called him son till the very end. When she passed quietly one spring morning, he buried her beside Eli, side by side under the oak. Every evening, Cole would sit on the porch facing that hill, tip his hat to the graves, and whisper, "We're home now, all accepted." And that's how the richest cowboy in the frontier found something money could never buy: family, forgiveness, and a heart unburdened. Because sometimes, the ones we choose to help are the very souls meant to save us. Welcome to Frontier Echoes, where every story of the Old West carries a heartbeat, stories not just of dust and guns, but of compassion, courage, and second chances. If this tale touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? The frontier has many stories left to tell. Stay with us, partner, the fire's still burning.